Welcome to Asian Book Club, where we highlight Asian and Asian American authors. We are your hosts,
Jamae and Sabangan.
and I'm Stephen Park. And today we're on our first read of the Mythology Class by Arnold Are, and we're reading about folklore in this. And it's a really cool integration of Philippine folklore, but then it got me to thinking, how much did you actually grow up with hearing these gods or these names or this actual folklore that they're mentioning?
So there are some things in the mythology class that we've read so far that have been part of my childhood, such as the Aswang and the Manananggal.
Mm-hmm.
But the gods themselves are not really a part of the things that I grew up with. And I think a part of that was because of growing up with Catholicism and Christianity and trying to reintroduce me to the one true God.
Right. It's funny though, because I did some research and we'll talk about it later, but the gods are actually derived in a sense from Spanish colonialism a bit, and
Hmm.
it is kind of meshed into the original belief of the people of the Philippines. So it's a little fascinating that that's there, but definitely the characters or the encantos, as they call them here,
Mhm.
are something that's pretty familiar with what I think I grew up on too. So the folklore that I got were from these books, and it's like an encyclopedia of books that my parents had really early on, and it has a Korean and English translation, and it tells the stories of like if you're going to be greedy, these goblins will come and get you, or
Mhm.
if you're going to disobey your parents, this thing will come out and grab you, or it's always striking fear for bad things that you would have done as a kid that the parents want you to stop doing.
Exactly. And that's what I think about not only with Filipino folklore, but with Chamorro folklore added into the mix. It's always the scary things like the tatamonas are going to get you if you don't ask for permission. The aswang is going to get you at night if you leave the house without telling your parents.
Right. And it also carries into the American translation of this or American European translation, which is like the Aesop's fables, where, there are these characters designed to kind of guide you in the right way or the quote unquote right way. It's to create morality in kids.
Yeah.
So I know that that seems to be the determination of where all this stuff comes out of. And it was just a fascinating way that Arnold Are decided to bring it all together and form it in a way that maybe you don't really need to know what these characters are because the drawings from the graphic novel will help with that. But it seems like there's a familiarity, no matter what cultural upbringing or something that you had, that, there's a fear-driven element to these monsters or demons that have been created to put you on the right track.
Well, technically, Encanto just means mystical creature,
Right.
but even though they're all mystical, they're not all well received. And like you said, they're usually fear-based.
Right. I don't know necessarily if they're not even well received. It seems like the purpose of this book is to send them back to their time or
Right,
to their proper place.
right.
But we'll talk about that as we get into the book. But prior to that, let's go into our recommendation for the week.
Our recommendation for the week is the sex talk. And no, not the sex talk that your parents give you, but
Or the
Kate,
one I received 3 times.
or the one you didn't receive at all.
Yeah.
But the sex talk by Caitlin. Caitlin is an artist who creates art and talks about sex, pleasure, and justice. They have a link on their link tree where you can anonymously ask questions about sex as well as fill out a form for sex toy assistance. They've hosted the Portland Sticker Fair in 2023, and you can shop their stickers, cards, keychains, and other goods from in person markets around the Portland area or online at thesextalk.myshopify.com. You can learn more about their work on Instagram at The Sex Talk, and that's spelled THES3XTALK.
Yep. And that's going to be our recommendation for the week. Okay, so let's get into our first read of The Mythology Class by Arnold Are. And so for our first read, we read pages 1 through 113.
Mm-hmm. And in the first few pages, we are introduced to a very, very, very big number of characters.
Yeah, this is the thing that I dislike, the fact that we get all these characters bunched in all together. And there's a lot. Besides the main characters that we get, we also have the gods. So if you don't recognize those names or if you aren't familiar with them, then
Mm-hmm.
it's another character that you have to know.
Definitely. And so let's talk about the gods themselves. Let's start with Batala.
Right. So I think it's also important to recognize that these gods are actual gods. These aren't, well,
Mm.
let's say these are the ones that are mythologized within the culture. So they're
Yes.
not just created out of nowhere. I want to say they're not fictionalized because these are characters that people
Hmm.
grew up with and have worshipped and have recognized.
Absolutely.
So yeah, Bathala. So Bathala is the supreme being, also known as Bathala Maikapa. He, because this is given a male gender to it, so he is regarded as the creator and ruler of the universe. This was prior to the 19th century and the Spanish missionaries, and the term was used to replace the term that was coined prior to the 19th century, prior to the Spanish missionaries. And the actual term Bathala replaced the words Panginoon and Diyos.
Which is God, essentially.
Mm. So he is the creator of everything. He appears apparently during different phenomenon such as floods, fires, and earthquakes to kind of show his vengeance against the world. The worship of Bathala is kind of throughout the Philippines
Hmm.
and most prominent in the Luzon area and amongst other indigenous tribes. But ultimately, like I said, he's your typical male god figure that is a worship me or I'll smite you kind of mentality,
Hmm.
but always a humble god. I always think that's a little bit funny, but
Well, I think it's interesting that in the book, Batala doesn't seem to be a very spiteful god. He
hmm
seems to be one that just created everything
hmm
and needs these encantos to come back to where they were created for.
right, right, right. And then we have one of our other main characters, which is Bantugan.
Hmm.
So this is there's a whole story behind him. It's slightly interesting actually because the mythology isn't extremely easy to find and it's a little bit convoluted through
Mm,
different, websites and things that I was checking on.
definitely, as most gods in the Filipino folklore are.
Right, because it's usually pretty widespread and then having to be translated through different languages, I'm
Yep.
sure it gets convoluted a bit.
Yep.
So, Bantugan is a legend and is known to have been able to fly into heavens, walk on water, and breathe underwater for a long time.
Mm,
So, he also prefers the mode of transportation of this giant wooden ship, which he's been known to go into battle with. But his origin story is really interesting. So, he grew up in a family that served the Bembaran people, and he was the son of a king, and he had a brother named Prince Madali. And once the king died, Prince Madali was named the heir of the throne, so was named the king of the land.
mm-hmm.
But not everyone wanted that. Most people wanted Bantugan to actually be the king because he was strong, he had protected them from different invasions, and honestly, people said that he was very handsome. So there was an invasion that came, and Bantugan went to go defend it. And because Prince Madali, or I guess King now, was jealous, he decided to put a ban against people talking to or associating with Prince Bantugan upon the threat of death. So no one was allowed to talk to him. So when Bantugan finally arrived back, people ignored him and he felt, outcasted.
For sure.
Because of that, he decides to go on this long adventure, travel to different kingdoms, one of which was the kingdom between the two seas. Sadly, as he arrived to the kingdom between two seas, Bantugan was so tired from his travels that he actually collapsed and he died. When the king and Princess Datimbang found him, they knew immediately that he was royalty based on the clothing that he was wearing, and Princess Datimbang fell in love at first sight. She knew that she loved him automatically. So they brought him in. The king sent out an announcement to other kingdoms to try to find out who he belonged to, like which other kingdom. No one could really find the kingdom that he belonged to, except these parrots that talk to each other. And so the parrot of Bantugan was able to talk to the other parrots, then went back and told King Madali at the time. And Madali was struck with grief, with feelings of remorse for sending his brother out into the open. And so Madali went to the land of death, tricked the angel of death into letting him into this garden where there were bottles with souls. He stole his brother's soul back, took it back to the land. At the same time, Princess Datimbang took the body of Bantugan back to the original land, and with the soul intact being poured into his body, his life was restored.
Wow. Wait, so are these all siblings?
So Bantugan and Madali are siblings.
Okay.
Datimbang was from the land, the was from the
Oh,
Kingdom of Two Seas.
gotcha.
And that was also the person that was listed in the story. That was the wife of Bantugan, who, is now forming
Right.
the team of people.
Right, right, right.
So all in all to say, sorry, it was a really long story, but all in all to say is this actually comes from Philippine mythology and
Right,
folklore.
right.
It's not like these characters are made up. Lamang is just a very interesting character as well. He spoke immediately after birth. He apparently has these magical animals. One's a dog and one's a rooster. And when the dog barks, he can build up a house. He was eaten by a fish at one time, but then resurrected by his magical pets. So a little bit different story, but also a character that is in
Right.
Philippine folklore.
Yeah, definitely.
So I really appreciate that Arnold Ada went through the thought process of bringing these characters in, and
Mhm,
it's not just that this is a fictional book or a fictional graphic novel. It's
mhm.
that he's reaching for what people know and what people recognize as the stories that they grew up on.
Absolutely, absolutely. So, in addition to the gods, there are the characters who are part of the mythology class.
Right.
And the main character is Nicole, who completes her thesis on Filipino mythology, and when she's defending her dissertation, ends up with disappointing results from her dissertation team.
Right, right, right.
However, in the crowd that was listening to her dissertation was also Mrs. Encanta, who we'll kind of talk about more a little later.
Hmm.
Other characters and other students from the mythology class include Gio, Ray, and Sam.
Right. And I think the other thing to mention is that all these characters are brought there for a reason. They have a power, as it said, or truly they just have a reason for being there.
Right.
And so Nicole's power is her knowledge of the past and the history of all this. And then, like you said, Gio, Ray, and Sam are three different people, and they are known to have warrior instincts. So when
Yes.
things go down, they're ready to fight.
Yes. Then we have Lane and Misha. Lane is a kind of a psychic,
Yeah, telepathic,
a telepathic person, while Misha,
has a fearless attitude, as it said.
which I think is interesting because she's more, what I remember of her character is that she's very forgetful.
No, yeah, that too. And when we say fearless attitude, it doesn't stand up to the thing that happened when she met up with one of the Encantos, which we'll
Right.
go into.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
So I think she has more of like a spiteful, fiery attitude.
She's also the kind of comic relief in all
Oh,
this. She's very
absolutely.
funny.
Yes. Then we have Gina, who we later find out is conversing with a secret Encanto. And even the teacher doesn't know what her actual power is in the class.
Right. The way that it's described is, and this is a quote, your destiny still lies on a significant event.
Hmm.
So it's yet to be told.
Right. Then we have Angie, Bob, and Edward.
Right. And they're known for their ingenuity.
And then we finally have Lisa.
Right. And she's there for her curiosity.
Hmm. So those are the students in the class. Now we have the teacher who is referred to as Mrs. Encanta, but she is essentially the Princess Tatimbang
Right. Who is the wife of.
of Bantugan.
Right. Exactly.
Mrs. Encanta also has her assistants who traveled through time with her, which is Aili, Sulaiman, Kubin, and Tala.
Right.
And they each are different warriors of different times. And Tala is kind of this other Encanto herself.
Right. I couldn't tell if she was an assistant or not. I mean, she was definitely assisting them,
Mm-hmm.
but she is this spiritual, ghosty kind of person.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which is interesting, kind of reminding me of Calcifer.
Oh,
How
yeah.
how Calcifer is this like
Well, so Calcifer is from
house
Howling.
house moving castle, and Calcifer is kind of this star that fell from the heavens and is now helping Hal. So Tala, translated from Tagalog, means star. So I think that even though she comes in the form of a ghost, she might be a star from somewhere.
Yeah. So let's talk about that. So we know there are three other warriors.
Mm-hmm.
They haven't really made themselves too known except Kubin,
Mm-hmm.
but Tala is the one that we know most about because she's the one that gathers up this whole group or this
Yes.
ragtag bunch.
Yes. She shows up in a dream for each of these students that we just talked about. And by showing up in each of the students' dreams, they are summoned essentially from the gods. So Tala is kind of like the messenger of the gods to tell them to come to this class.
Right. And this is what binds them together is because no one else really knows to come to this class besides the people who are summoned.
Mm-hmm.
And everyone has the same experience. So when they meet up, that's what they share is that there was this ghostly kind of presence that came to them in their dreams and told them to take this class.
Yes. And they show up to the location that was on the pamphlet, which again is not necessarily a physical pamphlet. It's a pamphlet that they all kind of foresaw.
Right.
And they're far away from campus and they first meet the assistants.
Right.
Almost everyone runs away when the assistants talk about the dream because they all freak out, except for Nicole. Nicole is the only one who stays and is walked through the enchanted chambers because she's the only one who's kind of like, well, I'm here, so might as well figure out what's happening.
Kind of, but it's also because she's so depressed that she just failed her dissertation
Right.
that she just doesn't know what else to do. So she
Right.
stays out of a not a need to know more, but more out of a depression of not having succeeded
That's
just
fair.
previously.
That's fair.
Yeah,
But her apathy to stay ends up being a reward because she was walked through the enchanted chambers of this location and is shown the Nara tablets or the tablets of the folklore that she had done research on. And she's also rewarded by being shown how these assistants and Mrs. Encanta was able to travel through time.
right. Not to mention, she's also shown one other mythical beast,
Tikbala,
and that is the Tekbalang, who is like this half horse.
half human
Yeah,
character. Yeah.
yeah.
But what's interesting is that this Tikbalang isn't scary.
Yeah. Well, it was the only Tikbalang that was tamed, and so
Right.
it's actually helping them control the world.
There we go, for sure.
So, along with Nicole being missing, one of the other characters, I think it was Lisa or someone forgets their keys.
Misha.
It was Misha then, her power of forgetting. So Misha forgets her keys, and so everyone ends up coming back into this place. They are trying to go through the halls and look for, I think, both Nicole and the keys.
By themselves, yes,
Right.
without any direction.
Right, and that's when they end up stumbling into a room with all these other Encantos who are stuck in jars.
Right.
And then they end up breaking a jar and getting attacked. And this is what sets everything into motion.
Yes, this is how they end up buying into the reason why they're here in this mythology class. And Nicole encouraging them as well, being like, they're the real deal. There's something here. We need to do it.
Right. And the missions start pretty quickly.
Yes.
There's no learning curve, there's
No.
no training. It's just, all right, folks, you're ready. Let's get you out into the world and start fighting.
Well, not necessarily fighting. It's all capturing, but capturing with finesse.
Right. I guess by fighting, I mean fighting for their lives.
For sure.
So their first mission's kind of fun. It seems pretty laid back in a way until it's not. So I think the other really cool bit that's involved in this is that we have these teachers who come from such a long period of time
Mhm.
that they don't really know the modern world.
Mhm.
Then we have these kids that only know the modern world and
Right.
don't really know the history that well,
Right.
but they're kind of teaching each other different things.
Mm.
So their first mission is to capture a capre.
Right. One capre.
Right. And so capre is a giant hairy monster that lives in the forest.
Mhm.
I also looked this up, and apparently they can carry a strong body odor,
Mm.
and they tend to sit in tree branches and smoke, which is what that giant thing that
The
one of
giant cigar.
yeah,
Yes. So when they're out to capture the capre, the one capre, they're told that in order to lure them, they had to have people dancing. And so that's kind of what Lane and Misha were meant to do. They're supposed to dance and lure this creature to sleep.
right. And it's not just any dance, it's a Dewata dance.
A Dewata dance. Yeah, Dewata means fairy.
Right, exactly. So the way that they decide to go about this is because they don't want to and maybe don't know how to play live instruments, they decide to do a recording.
Mm-hmm.
So along with the recording, so that the capre can hear it, they decide to pull out these massive speakers. That's when they run into a problem.
because the music then brings out more capres.
Right, right. And that's when they're facing a whole forest of them. There's a whole situation with Misha where she passes out and faints as she's trying to do the dance because the capra turns into this much bigger monster.
Right,
And then so Lane takes over and eventually they're able to wrangle up all of them and they're safe and everything goes well.
right. Thanks to everyone working together.
Right, with their all individual unique skills.
Yes.
The other journeys that they end up going on are to fight four other mythical creatures. One
And by
is
fight, we mean capture.
by capture, yeah. So one is the Adarna bird.
Mm-hmm.
And so this one is a bird with powers of healing, and it's this really beautiful, like phoenix-like creature.
Mm-hmm.
The other one is the Shokois, and this one is more of like a merman aquatic humanoid creature with
Yes.
scales, webbed limbs, and fins.
Yes.
And they're known to be what is associated with drowning.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a group capturing them. We also have the Mananangos, which are bat-like beings with their torsos split from their legs.
Yes.
So this one's a little bit on the scarier side.
Mhm.
And lastly, we have the Tianak, which is, I think, the scariest of them all.
Right, which is a baby presenting monster.
Right, exactly.
And so the class is split into four different groups to capture these four different beings. Some of them are really scary, like the Manananggal and the Tianak, and others are a little easier, like the Adarna bird and the Shokoi.
Yeah, the Shoko was kind of funny because it just wanted to talk.
He just wanted to talk and be like, please capture me.
Yeah, the water is so bad here. I want to go
Exactly.
back to my clean waters.
Which, I mean, if you've been to Manila and have seen the Pasig River, you know what the Shokoi is feeling.
Right. So, they have their little adventures, things happen, but ultimately they come out of it fine. They capture all these creatures and they're learning how to become a team that can
Mm-hmm.
capture these encantos.
Yes. Behind the scenes, while the mythology class is capturing these displaced encantos, there's another mythological character that we talked about earlier, Lamang,
Right.
who is trying to put the vessel containing the aswang, which is a different encanto, they're bat-like, demon-like creatures that he's captured away from their temple.
Right. So what happened is over time, I think with the humans of the modern time digging so often, they find this box, which is where Lamang puts all these aswang in.
Mm-hmm.
And this box is actually displayed in a mall.
Right, which is essentially where the temple is.
Right. So Lamang is angry and upset that
Mm-hmm.
these humans just keep messing with these artifacts that they know nothing about. So
Right.
what he's trying to do is go bury it again so that no one can get hurt. So
Mm-hmm.
as he's on his way, that's when he is met up by the El Diablo fraternity.
Right. And I don't get why they have this vengeance against him,
I don't know either.
but they shoot at him, hitting the vessel and cracking it open.
Yep.
And by cracking it open, that means all the aswang in this vessel are released out into the open,
Right. And so they're freed. They are pretty immediately fed by these El Diablo fraternity brothers.
as well as Lamang, unfortunately.
No, I was wondering if he'd die. I was kind of hoping that somehow the magical creatures in the Lamang mythology would come and heal him, but the assumption is that he was probably eaten along with the El
The
Diablo
Diablo
fraternity.
fraternity.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But now these Aswang are set loose into the world, and for people that don't know what Aswang are, go back to our previous read of A Tiny Upward Shove by Melissa Chadburn.
Unfortunately, the aswang in this particular book aren't as friendly or kind.
Right. And they are more traditional Aswang, I want to say.
I think so, yes.
Like the ones that are willing to kill people with no real specific motive.
Exactly.
Yeah. So they're playing these scenes intermittently throughout the read.
Mm-hmm.
But one of the other interesting things that I saw Arnold Are put in was the discovery of the funny looking hammer.
Mm-hmm.
So what the Aswang mean by this, because they're creatures of the past, is when they end up killing and eating the El Diablo fraternity, they find these guns which
Yes.
they think are funny looking hammers.
Right.
Sadly, towards the end of our first read, they figure out how to use these guns, and what they end up calling it is a gift from Sitan.
Mm-hmm.
which I would assume is Satan.
Right, is their god.
Right. I thought that was such an interesting piece to put in
Mm.
because, right now, and I don't know how it is in the Philippines, but at least in America, we're dealing with a lot of gun violence type issues.
Right.
So for this scene to be there, for these demon-like creatures to find this gun and then call it a gift, I thought was very interesting
Mm-hmm.
and poignant.
Right, definitely.
So ultimately, that's kind of our read. We are learning about the characters. We had some action, but the action is much more dealing with still learning about the characters.
Exactly.
The other things that we see in the story is that Misha and Ray have some type of love past
Right. And so they're always quarreling, they're always at each other's throats,
right,
trying to,
either flame up a relationship or trying to just get each other a little bit riled up.
right, just trying to best each other.
Right. And we also have this budding relationship between Nicole and Kubin, which is one of the longtime characters, and Nicole, which is, one of our main
Main leads,
leads.
yes, which is interesting. Like I saw it coming, but also I was like, "Oh, you could okay, sure."
Yeah, it's happening pretty quickly too. At this point, Nicole has kissed Kubin,
Mm-hmm.
so things are happening.
They are happening.
But what are your thoughts on this book so far? Like, how easy or difficult was it for you to get into the story?
I think it was pretty easy to get into the story. Right after all the chunking of the characters, specifically the students, once I got through that, it was easy to fly through the story. I felt like I was going through 10 pages within minutes.
Right, I agree. I thought the story was really easy to get into. I think the visualization of the characters helps.
Mhm.
If I were to be honest, if you were to show me the sketch of somebody, I maybe still might not recognize him. Like, I still know the main characters like Lane, Nicole, Kuben, all these people.
Mhm.
But I think some of the other ones, like the trios between Gio, Ray, and Sam,
Right.
it's a little bit harder for me to kind of distinguish them out.
For
But
sure.
the actual story was so easy to read through and so digestible.
Mhm. What parts of the story have been the most intriguing so far?
I love the comedy that's being brought in between
Mhm.
scenes. So even just the way that they tend to capture the creatures,
Yes.
it's a little bit more on the side of manga or manhwa where it's comical. It's not these intensely dark scenes where people are
Mhm.
attacking and killing. It's much more like this funny scene of, okay, how do we capture? Like the one
Right.
with the Shokoi is like
Right.
this crazy monster jumps onto the boat and it's like, oh no, just he just wants to talk. Like you
Yes,
can relax. He's not
exactly.
gonna kill us.
Exactly. I think something that's intriguing that you mentioned earlier is how some of the scenes are cut scenes. Like it's not every panel in one page is of the same time and it's not of the same scene either.
Right, right,
For example, when the groups were separated into four,
right,
the scenes with Misha and Ray were at the very bottom all the time. And
right,
that was also the comedic relief where they kept fighting with each other. And then it goes back to the groups who are not fighting with each other. They're actually working well together to capture these different
right,
encantos.
right, right.
So, because of those jump scenes, how has reading them between the flashbacks and the cut scenes in the present felt like for you?
It's like I said, I think it's the visual aspect of it, but it's
Mm-hmm.
felt very easy. I haven't really gotten lost in any of this.
Mm-hmm.
Everything seems very straightforward, and it's like seeing a very beautiful story just being projected into my brain.
Definitely. I think, like you said, the fact that it's visual helps because you can see the difference between the before times and the now.
Right,
When, for example, when Nicole's flashback when she was a younger girl and people tricked her because she
right,
believed in the Encantos,
right,
she looked very similar to that younger character, but also the wash of
right.
the scene looked different.
Right, right, exactly. I also want to mention how beautiful these scenes are, and everything
Mm-hmm.
is handwritten. Everything seems like it has such a personal touch.
Yes.
There's still that one page where the Aswang come out of the capture device.
From the vessel.
Right, and then that next page is this
It's a
massive,
splash page of all of the different aswang, and they all look different
Right.
too. Some have horns, some are just really ripped,
Right. And
others
it's
are just scary looking.
right, and it's such a cool page. I mean, that's probably one that we maybe will put up on our Instagram just because I think that's such a beautiful drawing.
Mm-hmm.
But everything is so well made.
Yes.
So let's kind of go into predictions then. Because one of the characters that we didn't talk about is Nuno. Now, Nuno is the character that Gina has yet to reveal to the group.
Right, because Nuno is an Encanto,
Right.
and Nuno doesn't want to be captured.
Right. And from my opinion, I think Nuno's going to be massive in the story.
Mm,
We already kind of got that little reveal of how important Gina's decisions are going to be.
right,
Clearly, Nuno is a part of that.
exactly.
But I feel like Nuno's maybe the worst of all the Encantos.
Maybe, especially now, because he took something of Lamang's,
Oh, right, right, right.
and by taking that thing, I'm thinking that he is gonna create chaos from it.
Right. Do you think it's going to be good or do you think he's going to end up being evil?
Oh,
Like,
I think he's 100% evil.
oh, okay. I feel like there's a possibility that he ends up being like the savior character in the
Mm,
end, where he will bring the weapons that Lamang put into that bamboo casing. So, yeah, we'll see where his story
for
goes.
sure.
But what do you foresee going on with our next read?
I think they're gonna do more missions, and I think the missions are going to be even more impossible as they go along.
Mm-hmm.
And I also think that the Aswang are going to be a big problem in the very near future. Like, it's not going to grow into something bigger. I think they're going to be taken care of sooner rather than later.
Right, 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 right. Yeah, I think the same thing. I am curious where the story goes. It's such a fun, easy read. I'm very glad that this is following up some of the other reads that we had.
Yes.
So, where do we go from here? What are we reading next?
We are reading pages 114 to 226.
Awesome. And if you have any thoughts or recognize any of the folklore, I'd love to get your thoughts on the interpretation from the mythology class.
Mm-hmm.
So, for people to connect with us, how can they do so?
Y'all can email us at asianbookclubpod@gmail.com, or you can join the conversation on Instagram at asianbookclubpod.
Yep, and we also have our website, which is asianbookclubpod.com. That has our bookstore that has books that we've read in the past, books that we recommend, and books we plan to read in the future.
And a great way to support us is to rate, review, and subscribe to the podcast.
Otherwise, make sure to be happy, be healthy, and read a book.
Ingat!
Bye.
Bye!